All right, so let's get started, I guess. So yeah, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Before we get really started, I just want to go over a couple of housekeeping items. So today's Business Bites session is being recorded, and we will have an engaging conversation with our panel for about 45 minutes, and the last 10 to 15 minutes of a Q&A. So please use the chat to ask questions. After this webinar, you will receive a thank you email that we will include a link to the recording and a short survey and some more information about our next Business Bites scheduled in October. So, okay, so yeah, my name is Julia Schlier, and I'm with HanaHaus in Newport Beach, a flexible co-working space and cafe. Unfortunately, we are still closed, but we are excited that we partnered together with On-It Access, an innovation consulting firm, to host Business Bites every second Wednesday of each month. We invited thought leaders to share their insights and experience on various topics like leadership, innovation, and technology. So please make sure to check out our event schedule at hanahaus.com/events and follow us on social media for any updates. Our wonderful Kelly O'Connell from On-It Access is our moderator today. And Kelly, we're excited about the next hours to come, so please take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julia. I truly appreciate the opportunity to partner on Business Bites, and I'm incredibly excited for today's conversation about change agility, empathy, and inclusion in the workplace. Before we get started and give the panelists an opportunity to introduce themselves, I just want to take a moment for any of you who are joining us on the Pacific Coast to acknowledge the experience that you may be encountering due to the fires. We know today's a very unusual day, and so thank you for making the time to join us, and you're in our thoughts as you're experiencing these difficult days with the forest fire. That said, it's perfect conversation to talk about change agility and empathy because our workforce is certainly experiencing change today. We've brought an incredible global panel together to talk about both academic and experiential aspects of the role of change in today's workforce. With no further ado, I want to give those panelists an opportunity to introduce themselves to you. So Robin Miles, Robin, if you don't mind, we'd love for you to give us a brief introduction.
Absolutely. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Robin Miles, and I currently work at VMware in Palo Alto, California. So we are really affected by the smoke today, but still chartering on. And my role there is as a head of global management development. And we have about 29,000 employees at VMware, and my responsibility is for about 5,000 managers and making sure that they are effectively resourced to be the best managers that they can be. So I'm super excited about our conversation today. Empathy is one of my most favorite topics, as well as inclusion. So looking forward to joining in the conversation and hearing from everyone in the audience as well. Thank you so much, Kelly.
Thank you very much. Dr. Miranda Jensen, I believe you're joining us from Australia, where it is very early.
Thanks, Kelly. So it's 5 a.m. this morning in Melbourne, but I'm really pleased to be here. So thanks for having me along. It's going to be a fantastic discussion, I'm sure. It couldn't possibly be anything else with this topic, which is very much aligned to the work that I do in my consulting practice on Song Group. So I'm a change and transformation specialist, and I've had my consulting practice for about 5 years. But my background is as a musician and an artist, and I studied opera in my undergrad, and I've leveraged some of the learnings from my PhD research and developed a method around how things transform. So it's going to be a fantastic conversation today. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. Also joining us today from Australia is Dr. Irina Yashin-Shah. Dr. Irina.
Thanks so much, Kelly. The very first thing I'd like to say is thank you very much to both yourself and HanaHaus for supporting this great series. I think it's an absolutely wonderful event. It's a pleasure to be here and also to meet the fellow panelists. And my thoughts go out to all of you in the bushfire affected area as well, because we've had our own fair share of that, and I know how traumatizing that can be. So indeed, thoughts are with you. I'm really a teacher at heart. I'm an educator. My whole life has been dedicated in one form or another to education in schools and universities, in the workplace, and now increasingly online and virtually. And to put it in a nutshell, my mission and purpose in life is really to be a liberator of leadership and innovation and creativity, and more recently, intrapreneurialism, which is all about liberating the underutilized talent that we've got languishing within our organizations and within our workplaces, which, if we could tap into and unleash and harness, I really believe we could just solve the problems of the world. So what really lights me up is to see people become empowered, and then to use that empowerment to do wonderful and remarkable things. And so in my role, more recently, I've launched a number of initiatives around that. So I organised the annual Australian Entrepreneurs Summit at the Brisbane Convention Centre. I'm editor-in-chief for Intrapreneur magazine, and just very recently we've launched a global initiative called the Global Intrapreneurs Institute, which is an online community for supporting intrapreneurs from all around the world and helping to keep them inspired, because they can sometimes, feel like they're pushing uphill, if I can put it like that. So that's a little bit about me, and I'm looking forward to the conversation that's about to follow.
Thank you, Dr. Irina. And last but certainly not least, joining us from New York City is founder and entrepreneur Antonio Brass.
Hey, Kelly, thank you. Great to meet everyone else on the panel. I'm Antonio Brass, co-founder and CEO for a startup company called Blockquake, where we're launching relatively soon a cryptocurrency digital asset exchange that will be global in nature. So a lot of these topics really hit home for us, with us looking to acquire a global customer base. And prior to starting Blockquake, I actually spent over a decade in financial services, global banking and insurance companies. I was in internal audit, so I traveled a lot around the globe and even domestically here in the States. And just collectively from those experiences, I feel like I personally connect with so many of these topics. And I've also spent a year training as an ontological coach prior to founding this company. So these are topics that have come up over the years, over and over again, and so important when you're looking at the world, truly in a global sense versus just your locality or the people immediately around you. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you, Antonio, and thank you all to all of the speakers who've joined us as attendees for today's session. You can see we have a brilliant panel, and the structure we'll have with them is to ask a series of questions, giving each panelist the opportunity to weigh on from their personal and academic experience related to that topic. If at any time during today's conversation you have a question for the panelists, please feel free to add it in today's chat, and we will make sure to leave time at the end for a fireside chat style conversation. That being the case, we will jump right into our very first question, and I'm going to come back to you, Robin, asking the question, is empathy the power skill for the future fit career professional?
Well, of course, it's a resounding yes for me, of course, right? That's exactly why I'm so glad to join the call today. One of the reasons. I feel that empathy, I'm not sure if we've set context for the definition of empathy yet, Kelly, but there are two kind of definitions that I work from. One is affective empathy. That's when you are able to really see or feel a person's emotions from their perspective and feel what they're feeling. And then there is what we say cognitive empathy, and that is being able to see things through the lens of another person, think the thoughts, kind of see into the thoughts of another person. And when we put those two together, I think one of the topics that keeps coming up for us at VMware, or has been lately, especially through COVID, is being able to bring the humanity back to leadership and back to corporate America, so to speak. And I think empathy is the best vehicle for that, because it requires that we have to suspend our ego, and we are challenging ourselves to become others focused, others centric. And you do that by, thinking about what is the other person potentially feeling in this situation? What could the other person be thinking in this potential situation? And then using that information to really make a very human centric decision. I think that in terms of, why it's a power skill, it's because it really requires you to really put your whole self into it. You have to actually really be able to, we're not 100% wired to think about other people. We're much more wired to think about ourselves. So you have to be conscious and intentional. And I feel that, if we were to all, work from that paradigm, we would create conditions within organizations where people feel like they're being heard, they will feel like they are being seen, and they will also feel like they actually belong there. And empathy is definitely part of that. And it's actually really one element of, at the core, is emotional intelligence, really. It's really being able to harness that emotional intelligence through the lens of empathy. And just imagine the types of high performing teams we could cultivate if maybe as leaders we could step out of the way a little bit and put ourselves back into the shoes and feelings of those who we are leading, and harnessing those skills to be high performing. So yes, for sure, empathy is a power skill, and it takes some intention for us to cultivate.
Thank you very much, Robin. Miranda, when you were introducing yourself, you shared with the audience a bit about your early career and personal experience, as well as your academic research. I'd love to hear from you how that early foundation in music has helped you to tap into the role of empathy, and to hear from you if you agree, is empathy a power skill for the future fit career professional?
Absolutely. Thank you, Kelly. And I'm so glad that you've made that link, because I wasn't going to talk about that in this question, but that is absolutely where my empathy skill came from, is my background as an artist. As a developing artist, I always loved the exploration of the human experience through art, through any form, whether it be acting or singing or music storytelling. It's all about the human experience. And so you learn so much about listening and reading other people's whole body way of interacting with one another. So it's a fascinating way to explore the world through that lens of other people. And so that's just been a natural skill that I've sort of brought with me into my professional career. In the corporate space. But what I really wanted to focus on, and I agree 100% with everything that Robin said, particularly around the leadership aspects at the end there. But what I want to talk about, I think empathy, yes, it is a power skill, but not in isolation. So not as we know it, and not as the leading factor that gets us to this culture of empathy. I really think there's been such a big shift in recent years. Mindfulness now is so mainstream and accepted. I heard someone talking on the telly the other day. She just dropped into a sentence around, I manifested that. There wasn't even a definition or an explanation. It is just accepted now. So I really think we need to bring that whole self to the workplace first, because unless we can have that awareness on self and build confidence and courage and all of those attributes in our individual selves, not until we do that will we be able to truly step up to a culture of empathy.
Thank you very much. Dr. Irina, you've had an opportunity to work with large global organizations, and you shared briefly in your introduction about the work you're doing around entrepreneurship and entrepreneurialism. If you could share from your perspective, is empathy a power skill, and how does that play out in a corporate setting?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Kelly. I'm happy to talk about that. I think that there is a really interesting movement that's happening right now towards humanizing the workplace. And we've just heard both Robin and Miranda talk about that. And it's so overdue and it's so exciting to see that happening. It's this recognition that we bring our whole selves to work, and there's so much talent, there's so much depth, there's so much wisdom that lies unearthed and underutilized within our workplaces. And I think specifically as a result of COVID, we're actually seeing that people are realizing that their colleagues have lives outside of work, and that we're having these meetings online, and we see people in their natural environments, and we see them being interrupted by their pets and their toddlers, and recognizing that we're not even three-dimensional, we're four-dimensional beings, and when we go to work we shouldn't be expected to leave our hopes and dreams at the door. And so COVID has really accelerated a lot of emerging trends. We were talking yesterday about how it's accelerated communication technology take-up and so many other things. But interestingly, I think it's actually accelerated this trend towards the humanization of the workplace. I've been reading a book called Humanocracy by Gary Hamill that literally just came out a couple of weeks ago, and I immediately downloaded it onto my phone. The subtitle of that book is Creating Organizations That Are As Amazing as the People Inside Them. And I loved that subtitle. So I think that this is a very powerful movement, an overdue movement, a movement that is going to change the way we think about how we work and how we interact with each other. And so full endorsement for what Miranda and Robin have said. The only thing I did want to say, and to bring a slightly different nuance to the conversation, is the language that we're using around the word empathy. Now, absolutely, I agree from that perspective that it is a power skill in the sense that it's a very important and useful component of our interactions with other people at work. But I'm actually thinking that it's probably not the word that I would use to describe it. Because when I think about someone who is empathetic, I think of someone who listens deeply and attentively, and you know that they're hearing you when you're talking to them, you know that they're seeing you because they're completely present, not waiting for you to just stop and draw breath so that they can jump in with their own opinion about something. And goodness, have you noticed how noisy the world's become at the moment with people's opinions? So all the people I know who are deeply empathetic people are gentle souls, and there's a really beautiful stillness about them that comes from their core, and it's a joy to be in the presence of someone who's practicing deep empathy. But to call it a power skill probably has the wrong cadence for me, because it's almost the antithesis of power. So as I was reflecting on this question as part of my just my mental preparation for this conversation, out of the blue, some words from Shakespeare dropped into my head from The Merchant of Venice about the quality of mercy. And I think it works for empathy as well. And it goes like this. You've probably all heard of it. It's the quality of mercy, but I'm going to replace the word empathy. So the quality of empathy is not strained. It droppeth as the gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath. 'Tis twice blessed, It blesseth him that gives and him that takes. And my grade 9 English teacher would be very proud of me because I remember that off by heart, because we all had to learn it off for some exercises we were doing in class. But the point simply being is that it's a gentle exchange that benefits everyone, and it's not a call to arms. And so while I certainly see and hope that it is going to be much more present within our future workplaces, I just probably wouldn't quite use those words.
Mm. And one of the reasons that I love bringing the panel together, Dr. Arena, is to get that nuance, to move ourselves away from this binary of definition and to hear the exchange of ideas. And it makes me incredibly excited to transition from you to Antonio, coming from the world of finance and looking at the role of empathy as a power skill, from the idea of somebody who's building a team and forming a company. And so from your perspective, Antonio, is empathy a power skill, or, as Dr. Irina shared, a more nuanced and still valuable and important skill of listening for the future?
Yeah, I've learned, and I felt like I've always known this, that to Dr. Arena's point, it is very nuanced. I've often said of empathy that, you know, you're working to connect, relate, understand someone else from an authentic place. Like, you have to be authentic about it. People know if you're doing it as you know, just to get ahead versus if you really care. People can feel that and relate to that. And building a startup where, you know, we've got about 10 to 15 people working full-time, people in New York City here, some people in California, other countries. Everyone has different things going on. Our schedules are all over the place. People work different hours, and we often get on phone calls, video calls, and we each have our own lives, right? Everyone's from different economic classes, different ethnic backgrounds, different cultural backgrounds from whichever countries they might be from. And they bring that collective experience to the table. They have their experiences from before. And I found as this team was assembling for Blockquake, we really did take the time to understand these 10 to 15 core people that are involved every day, what their skill sets were beyond just what they did at the prior job they worked at. I found that we've learned one another, like, just intuitively. We spend a lot of time together, whether it's working on the project or socially. And, you know, to the nuanced point, it almost it's got to happen naturally. It can't be a scheme. It can't be a strategy, right? I think when you look at empathy, you've just got to be authentic around getting to know people. And it's, you know, it's what we're doing on the team. I think everyone's just been a natural at it. I think part of it is that it was baked in as we built the company from scratch. You know, that's contrasting me working in global financial companies where people often talked about empathy, but it felt like they were trying to employ it in a strategic way. And even though they were working towards it, it didn't necessarily always come from a natural or authentic place. It was more pointed towards, okay, how can I try to relate to this person to make more money, right, from that angle, versus actually let me understand what their real needs are and try to cater to that. And then understand all those other things, they'll fall into place. I've always said that in my life, that if you just act in integrity, all these other things will fall into place.
Thank you very much, Antonio. I think each of you brought such an interesting perspective to this first idea around empathy and looking at the theme of the human experience. My background being in human resources, we spend a lot of time these days as human resources professionals talking about bringing human back into human resources management, not just looking about financial gain or risk mitigation in the workplace, or how to progress in your career, but truly looking at aligning values and business objectives. And I think that empathy, from my perspective, is a key skill in doing that. At the same time, to Dr. Irina's point, as the moderator, I struggle with this idea of having to listen, but being very intentional about where to transition the dialogue to keep us on track. So that being the case, I'm going to move directly into our second question, asking you, Miranda, if you could, to answer, how does embracing inclusion help a company gain a competitive advantage? Or do you feel that it does?
Thanks, Kelly. Yes, absolutely does. And, you know, could go into all the stats on diversity and how those aspects of inclusion do help the bottom line. But I really wanted to jump ahead to, I know we're going to talk a little bit later about innovation, but I can't answer this question without bringing up innovation, because the competitive advantage is innovation in your organization. And innovation really is creativity. And as an artist with an arts background, creativity in the organisational corporate workplace is such an underutilised skill. And I really think we need to, similar to my response in the first question, really create that space where the whole person is welcome and embraced and allowed to be their whole self in the workplace, so that they can bring their creativity, whether that be in a formal art setting or whether that just be as a chef or just, you know, someone that just enjoys a little bit of creativity in their life, and really encouraging those skills to bring that innovation and that competitive advantage into the workplace. I'm a big fan of transferable skills, and I think there's, you know, you talk, Kelly, about the human resources role there, and I think there really is an opportunity for the human resources practice to really bring in support around transferable skills, because it's not something that we've been conditioned to bring into the workplace. So people really need to develop that skill to be able to identify what is it in their life with that toddler running around that gives them a skill that is beneficial to the workplace, and to really create that space where those unique creative skills are encouraged and embraced and celebrated. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Dr. Irina, I couldn't help but notice you nodding your head along as Miranda was speaking. If you don't mind, I'd love to hear your perspective on this.
Thanks, Kelly. And the reason I was doing that, because I was just thinking, Miranda and I both live in Australia, albeit she's in Melbourne, I'm in Brisbane, but we don't know each other. And as she's talking, I feel like she's a sister from another mother, because I did my PhD in creative problem solving, and as a teacher and as a university lecturer and as an educator, my whole life's been about transferable skills. So Miranda, you're going to be getting a phone call from me sometime pretty soon, okay? So great to meet you, and I'm so delighted that this panel is such a wonderful networking opportunity for us as well. But just to the question about embracing inclusion as a competitive advantage, a couple of comments. First of all, number one, I'm really glad to hear us talking about inclusion and not just diversity, because we hear a lot about diversity and less about inclusion, and yet without diversity and inclusion together, like one without the other, it's only half the story. You know, it's like as poet Langston Hughes said, it's like a broken winged bird that cannot fly. So the reason I say that is that it's conceivable to have a diverse workforce, but if the culture is really toxic and people don't feel like they belong, then what's the point? And, we've got so many benefits that come from having a diverse workforce, but unless people also feel that sense of community, then all of those benefits might go unrealized. So as Miranda alluded to, there is so much research around the benefits of this. Everything from increased revenue, increased financial performance, better creativity, more creative ideas, higher levels of innovation performance, better leadership performance. All of these are directly resulted from a result of diversity and inclusion. So just want to quote two pieces of research. One was by the Boston Consulting Group that produced a study a couple of years ago called how diverse leadership teams boost innovation. And it's a great piece of work. They report data that was gathered from 1,700 countries, 1,700 companies from 8 countries all around the world. And they found that there was a really strong correlation between diversity and inclusion and organizational performance. And I mention that because I know most of your audience is from the US. But if you don't mind, I would really like to foreground for a moment some groundbreaking research that's been done in Australia by an organization called Workplace Gender Equality Agency, or WGEA for short. And they published some absolutely stunning data just a couple of months ago, well, actually in June of this year, which focuses on gender inclusiveness specifically. So if you don't mind, if I just narrow that down for a moment, these were some of the statistics which I'll share directly with you. And then if your audience is interested, they can just Google WGEA. So companies who appointed a female CEO increased their market value by 5%, and that was worth nearly 80 million to an average ASX 200 company. Increasing the number of women in other key leadership positions by 10% or more increases a company's market value by about 6.6%, or an average of 105 million. And increasing the number of female board members by 10% or more produces 4.9% boost to a company's market value. Now, you know, that is hard data. So that's not just kind of getting a sense or knowing anecdotally that this is true. That is hard data that they've gathered around this really important concept. So while I would say that embracing diversity and inclusion really actually does help companies to gain a bottom line competitive advantage, let me go even further to say that it would be blatantly irresponsible, given that information, for them to not do it. And yet about 1/3 of the 11,000 organizations that WGEA annually collects their data from, 1/3 of them don't have a single woman on their boards. So hopefully these kinds of reports will help to change that. And I'll just say, if you want to find out more about that research, just Google WGEA.
I think that we could do another entire session just on the findings of the 2 research pieces that you just shared. Yeah. I'd love, if you don't mind, if you could find the link and add it to our chat. That would be incredible. Okay. And I'd love to transition to Robin and ask Robin for you to weigh in on this very important topic. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's really fascinating information. I thank you, Dr. Arena, for sharing that. I do feel that embracing inclusion inclusion helps companies to gain a competitive advantage. I believe that you know, especially that's really pertinent to us here in the United States, where we've been dealing with quite a bit of, you know, a civil unrest around this concept of diversity as well as an inclusion, and in particular for people of color, and even more specifically for African American or black citizens and employees in particular. And so this idea about, you know, of bringing yourself, your whole self to work is often a very different consideration that especially we as Black employees have to think a little bit more about, because traditionally in corporate America, you know, who we are, even just in America in general, is not always 100% accepted. So I think that first it's really kind of thinking about your employee base and understanding who is, you know, who your employees are. I believe also that one key, in my opinion, to embracing inclusion, it's one thing to have a company imperative around this, and it's I think that it's important to weigh the balance between the company's imperative or, requirements around inclusion or expectations, and then also a person's personal perspective. Because inclusion, in my opinion, is something that you as a person have to make a very personal choice to do. You have to choose to consider other, cognitive perspectives, right? We talked about empathy. You have to choose to embrace other thoughts, other ideas. You have to choose to embrace people that may not look like you. And once you get kind of over that hump, then I think you can move forward with this concept of embracing inclusion collectively as a company. And I think also there are concerns. We are wired neurologically, for sameness. So that's why having a personal commitment to inclusion is really important. And also that helps you to hurdle, with some grit and also some resilience, some of the challenges that comes along with having an inclusive culture. Because I think sometimes we think about, oh my God, it'd be great if everyone is all gets along. Well, sometimes it's not that easy. We talk about cognitive diversity and how that often initially leads to cognitive friction before you can have that collective harmony. And so I feel that, it'd be helpful for us to start talking about the realities of inclusion so that we can then support our companies to fully embrace it with the right behaviors and creating the conditions where inclusion can flourish.
Thank you very much, Robin. Antonio, you, as a leader, I'm curious to hear, as you think about your business plan and the launch of your company, if you believe that diversity and inclusion will provide your team with a competitive advantage, and then also what leadership's role is in doing what Robin has just shared, is creating an environment where people have the choice to be inclusive and where there's a supportive environment for people to truly bring their whole selves to work.
Yeah. What Robin, Irina, and Miranda said, it's so key. As all of them were speaking, I was like, wow, it's just like I'm living this right now. Everything that they're saying, yeah, just diversity and inclusion. It is so key, and what everyone else already pointed out, it goes beyond just racial or cultural diversity or ethnic diversity. It speaks to gender. It speaks to different having different ideas. That's part of inclusiveness and diversity. And uh, companies really should do that. In my space that I'm in right now, in blockchain and cryptocurrency, it's not very diverse. We're probably one of the few companies out there where our team was built diverse from scratch. We've got men, women, people from different religious, ethnic, country backgrounds, and different thoughts as well. And to Robin's point, we've definitely had it. We started in January 2018. It's over 2.5 years later. We have people that think very different ways from different industries, and we've promoted a culture of bringing your thoughts to the table. Don't be afraid. Actually, like when we have team meetings, talk about it, or reach out to anyone on the team and talk about it. Let's hear what you're thinking. And there is initially, as you get to know one another, there is that natural friction because you are trying to identify with the other person, right? We go back to empathy and all these topics we're talking about today where, you're working with someone brand new and you're really trying to relate to each other. And you eventually get there where it's just intuitive. You understand what the other person's really trying to say. And now you get to that point where it's a mature cycle as far as looking at things in an inclusive way. So we've been through that, and a lot of it from leadership, right? We keep talking about top-down approaches. It really does come from the top, where a company's leadership needs to embrace this. They need to constantly talk about it. It needs to be front and center, and they have to live it themselves. They have to be out there showing that they're trying to create a broad-based team and just making a difference from that perspective, right? And it is a competitive advantage, particularly if you're seeking to be a global company as we are, when you're trying to attract business from other parts of the world or just the country you're in, where someone from another city might be different or different thought processes. They want to, customers want to relate to a company that they're giving their business to.
Thank you very much. As we continue this conversation, I'm going to ask Dr. Irina to weigh in on our next question. We have a number of questions coming up from the audience as well in the chat, and I want to make sure that we have ample time to receive their questions. So I'm just going to ask two of you to weigh in on this next question, and then the other two to weigh in on the final question, just to make sure that we have a chance for our team chat. So that being the case, Dr. Irina, turning it to you, will change agility determine organizational success in tomorrow's landscape?
Thanks, Kelly. And to put it very succinctly, in the words of Eliza Doolittle from My Fair Lady, abso-bloomin'-lutely. And then just to balance that one out, we've got that famous quote from Charles Darwin that we're all familiar with, I'm sure, that it's not the strongest nor the most intelligent of the species that survives. It's the one that is the most adaptable to change. And my goodness me, haven't we been thrown into the learning experience for that right now? So look, change agility for me is the ability to learn fast and act fast and figure out really quickly what isn't working. And people who are change agile are not disorientated when the environment or circumstances shift, but rather they can just do whatever they need to recalibrate, get back on track and keep going. So it's really about being highly adaptable. So I think it's very closely tied up with the concept of learning agility. You can tell that I come from an education background. So it's really about learning what you need to, when you need to. And that requires a commitment to lifelong learning. And that is absolutely essential in our world today because knowledge is increasing at an unprecedented rate. So according to IBM, knowledge is literally doubling every 12 hours right now. So we're living through extraordinary times of change. The half-life of knowledge is rapidly decreasing, and that's the amount of time that it takes for half the facts of or information or knowledge within a particular field to become superseded or obsolete. So what this means is that the skill of learning is far more valuable and important than any specific information learned. And we've been definitely reminded about that in this time of global disruption and in this pandemic, when so many businesses have been thrown into uncharted territories. And many of them have been very change agile. I mean, we've seen some wonderful examples of creative problem solving, Miranda, here in Australia, where businesses have very quickly pivoted their core services into a completely different area in order to meet new market demands. For example, just one example that I came across recently that I thought was so clever was a medium-sized company, an SME, that built stages for large events. And of course, the live event industry is completely collapsed, not just here in Australia, but just everywhere. And they switched from making huge big stages for live events to building smaller desks to support people working from home. And they're beautifully designed, easy to construct, and they've sold thousands of them by repurposing their existing equipment. And without that pivot, they'd probably be out of business, but they've been change agile. And then I'll just close with an example from my own experience. Is that okay, Kelly, or have I got time to just share a couple of things?
30 seconds.
Okay, so earlier on this year, in March, I was organising a national conference, the Australian Intrapreneur Summit, at the Brisbane Convention and Exhibition Centre. And we had speakers coming from all over the world and delegates from all over Australia. And it was scheduled for the 19th of March. And last year we were sold out. So, you know, I said, yeah, we can do this. So we went for bigger and bolder and bigger than Ben-Hur. And of course, the 19th of March was exactly the time that we went into lockdown. And it was one of those challenges, one of the biggest business challenges of my life. Of, you know, people were saying to me, you're going to have to cancel, you can't go ahead. And of course we couldn't. So what we did was literally at the 11th hour, with 2 days to spare, we pivoted the whole event from being a live event to being what we'll call a hybrid event, which was that we still had a physical base. We set up a broadcasting studio at the Brisbane Convention Centre and beamed people in from all over the world, and all of our delegates, you know, were able to jump on. And so we were able to do that in the space of a very short time. And that was change agility. It was incredibly stressful, but very, very exhilarating. Mm-hmm. Now, that was probably the first big conference that went hybrid because of the timing. Now, of course, since then, everyone's doing, you know, virtual, if not hybrid events, but not back in March because of the timing. You know, we were right at that forefront of being given the gift of an opportunity to be change agile, and it worked beautifully. So I would definitely say that it is absolutely essential for businesses to be thinking about this whole notion of change agility, learning agility, in order to be successful in this current and future landscape.
Thank you, Dr. Irina. Speaking of change agility, I wish that I made this session a half-a-day workshop and not the hour-long time that we have together. I think I could hear from all of you for a long time about your expertise. I'm going to turn this question to Robin because in your last answer, Robin, you touched on two attributes, resilience and grit, that just as Dr. Irina pointed out when sharing that diversity goes with inclusion, I believe resilience and grit go hand in hand with change agility. And so I'd love for you to weigh in on this topic.
Absolutely. Most definitely, resilience and grit weighs into change agility. And to Dr. Irina's point, I think all of us can really say that we have attained a good amount, a modicum of grit and resilience over the past few months, right? Being in lockdown. One thing that I will add to Dr. Irina's wonderful explanation of this in response to this question is that we are as agile as we are stable. Mm-hmm. And one of the elements to agility that McKinsey actually has a really great research on this topic is that in order to be able to pivot and move with agency, that you have to have some anchor. Similar to a tennis player, you see a tennis player have a tennis player stance, which is their anchor, and they are able to then pivot to the right, to the left, to the front, and to the back, depending on where the ball goes, because they have that anchor. And it's so important for us to have this in organizations, to allow what can be stable to be stable, so that it gives us that room to be able to flex and move when disruption comes. We know that the research says even with just minimal interruptions during the day, if you're doing your email or deep in thought or doing something really concentrated, if you're interrupted, it takes 20 minutes to get back to task. So when we're thinking about agility, think about how hard it is once we're disrupted for us to actually get back to center. And so it takes that much more skill and discipline in order to do that. So change agility is super important. And I feel like if nothing has taught us that we need to be agile, then this recent experience in this pandemic, I'm not sure what else is going to help people to understand how important this skill set is.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Robin. I couldn't agree more. I think that sometimes you're confronted, just as that tennis player is confronted with a ball coming at them very rapidly, sometimes you're confronted with change that creates a response. I think that the best organizations are proactively helping to empower their teams to create that base that makes it easier for them to anticipate change. And that's a great way for us to transition to the final question that I will ask Antonio first this time. Antonio, can and should organizations develop a culture of innovation within their workforce?
Yes, absolutely. To what everyone was saying earlier, a lot of this is connected to change agility, to inclusion, to empathy. I'm in a space where things are changing every day, every week, every month. There's something new happening, and on the innovative front as well. So there has to be that culture of being able to stop on a dime and change direction and adjust. We often have things. I joke around that we've had thinking innovatively and with agility was kind of forced or thrust upon us. It's just the nature of the industry we're in, where something changes every single week. So the thing that we've done with our team is this goes back to encouraging people to actually speak their mind, talk up in team meetings, or reach out to somebody. When I think about culture of innovation, it's where people are constantly sharing their ideas on where we could take what we're doing in our industry, because things are changing all the time, and we need to really stay on top of what do people in the markets want from what we're currently working on. So I think that it's absolutely necessary to develop that culture of innovation and get everyone involved. It is easier for us as a startup where right now 10 to 15 people, we're all able to communicate directly. For larger organizations, I've worked at larger organizations. I've seen some companies I work with develop a pipeline or a way to streamline those ideas and information into a central body or group of people that will actually go through that and then raise that up to senior management to take a look at that stuff. So it's I've seen it firsthand that you constantly have to be thinking about innovation if you want to survive both as an individual, employee-wise, and as an organization if you're trying to stay in business.
Thank you very much. And Miranda, since you mentioned earlier the important role of creativity as it relates to innovation, we must also be sisters from different continents. I wanted to give you an opportunity to weigh in on this question as well.
Thanks, Kelly. And I might also touch on a couple of the questions that people have asked in my response as well, because I want to talk about what innovation in action looks like in the organisation. And Cam's asked around, inclusion and what does the organisation look like when inclusion is happening. Now, the thing, I lead organisations through these large, complex 3-5 year transformational changes where they're changing everything. And the one thing that I always find fascinating is that organisations can't see that they're changing. They feel the challenges of it, but they can't see how far they've come, particularly when they're in the, that performance dip where things get really, really hard and they're starting to question whether or not it's actually worth it, and they cannot see how far they've come. So some of those things, when innovation is actually working in the organization, it's about setting aside dedicated time for it, actually saying, we're going to get in a room and we're going to challenge one another to be as creative and innovative as possible. really getting that focus on it, and then that will proliferate through the general work practices. But it's also about bringing in new perspectives as well that are creative in nature. So, you know, invite some artists into the organization, you know, bring in people from different industries and really encourage those new perspectives that are creative in nature. There's one organization that I did a large cultural transformation at, and a brilliant CEO, and it was in government, our sort of consumer affairs function, and the CEO set up a festival of ideas, and that just gave us permission to be as creative as possible. She was very creative. I dressed up as a clown that day. I believe that I sung for the staff and made Play-Doh, you know, just bringing the most left field creative things that you can, because that gives people permission to bring their whole self and their creativity into the workplace as well. So always go for a 10 or 100% with your creativity, because that inspires other people. The other thing about innovation and creativity, you must celebrate the wins. So when somebody has been creative and that's resulted in a competitive advantage or increase in stats in the bottom line, celebrate those wins, but also celebrate the failures as well. And this goes to a question that Lynn was asking about, could you possibly be wrong? And, you know, like that fear that we have, particularly in the corporate and professional space, around being wrong. So we must celebrate our failures as well, because those mistakes are our learning moments. You know, and really what we're celebrating there is the courage that those individuals have brought to bring their whole self into the workplace, to try something that's creative and innovative, and it's okay to fail. We learn from that. The other final thing on innovation in action, and you know, it directly links, Cam, to your question around inclusion in action as well. You must track the benefits as well, so that you can use those benefits as evidence to encourage those people that may be struggling a little bit to step into that new culture and step into that space that you've created, to really demonstrate to them the value of them. And just finally on that, you know, you really need to create that space where people are bringing their whole selves with passion and purpose into the organisation, so that they can bring that creativity and enthusiasm, and really be 100% present in the workplace.
Well, thank you to all of our speakers. Dr. Miranda went through several of the questions we'd received in the audience chat, and I want to thank you for both being able to answer the question that was pre-planned and incorporating in some of the questions we'd had in the audience chat. We do want to, in these final moments, give our audience the opportunity to weigh in and ask any additional question. I will share that the ones that were just shared, really weighing in from Lynn, was, is there a danger that we maybe think we're being empathetic and believe we can feel the feelings or know what someone else is feeling and be wrong, which Miranda was able to touch on briefly. Also touching on briefly a second question, which is, what do organizations look like when this is happening systematically? I suspect that we don't see change agility systematically happening in standard organization initiatives. And so I think that if any of the other speakers want to weigh in on this very briefly, as we are approaching the end of today's Business Bites talk.
Yeah, I would love to weigh in on the dangers of kind of exercising our empathic muscles. We aren't going to always get it right. There's an amount of vulnerability that also comes into play when really being empathic. And I think the biggest gift that we can give ourselves and the person or individuals that we are extending that empathy to is what was brought up earlier. Being super curious, asking great questions, and really starting to listen. I think that helps us to get it right. You know, we may not always get it right. And what is right anyway, right? It's very subjective. But I would offer that to Lynn, who asked that question. You know, number one, really ask great questions. Get curious. The more curious we are, the more we can speak specifically to the needs of others and to hear things from their perspective, and also put on that listening ear.
Thank you very much, Robin. I don't want to end the conversation, as I think that this is an incredibly valuable conversation, but I want to respect everyone's time. We know many of us have competing demands right now more than ever. So thank you once again to all of our speakers. We do host Business Bites monthly, so I'll pass it back over to Julia to share with us next month. And just a quick thank you again to today's speakers.
Yeah, thank you, Kelly. Yeah, again, big thank you to all the speakers here today, as well as Kelly. It was a very insightful session. Thank you very much, as well as, thank you to everyone who joined us today. So I hope you really enjoyed this discussion. So yeah, please join us for the next Business Bites, which is scheduled for October 14. So mark your calendar. It's about reimagining leadership, developing agency, adaptability, and entrepreneurship in your organization. So more information will be in our thank you note coming up in the next few days. So please watch out for that, as well as the recording will be attached in there too. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Everyone.
Thank you.